HBO's Velma is received with backlash. Dungeons & Dragons receives backlash as Wizards of the Coast introduced a new gaming license. And Vinland Saga 2, Season 2 that is, just dropped, but I've only just begun. It seems like everybody's fighting each other. You're listening to a Hasty Podcast. I'm your host, Weston Hasty. This is the first official new episode of a Hasty Podcast for 2023. Welcome to the new year, everybody. I'm hopefully going to be trying some new things across all of the things that I do, including the podcast, of course. And that includes returning the video segment of the show to the YouTube channel. So if you're watching this on YouTube, if you happen to be, there is a video component of this podcast now where you can see me kind of like shuffle around in my seat and talk at the microphone and occasionally sip coffee, although actually my coffee is not made right now. It's being made as we speak. I will probably take a break partway through this podcast to go get my coffee, but there's a video component now. I'm hoping to also break the podcast into segments just a little bit. I don't know how hard and fast I'm going to stick to that or not, but I figured it would be a good way to sort of compartmentalize or something like so that I know what I'm talking about and when, and try to have some structure to the podcast as opposed to just me rambling for roughly an hour and you just kind of listen to what I come up with. There will still be my rambling nature, so if you're a fan of that, don't worry, it's still there, but at least this way I can cover the topics that I want to cover without forgetting anything. Hopefully without forgetting anything. That has yet to be seen. But welcome to 2023. This is the first new episode of a Hasty Podcast. Last week, I had an experimental episode where I released basically 5 episodes of my Weston Wednesday podcast. It's a mini podcast. It's a short, like 10-ish minute episode, 10 to 15 minute long episode podcast that I released on Patreon. Excuse me, I can't breathe today. Good start to the year. That I released to Patreon at patreon.com/Weston Hasty, where you can support my podcast and my writing and whatever else that I might be up to at any given time. Anyway, I have a mini-series there. Last week, we released a compilation of 5 of those episodes to see if that would take off, if people were interested in what I was doing over on Patreon, and also just so that people would have a better idea of what they're getting into if they do choose to support. That was last week. This week, we are talking about The World is on Fire. No, I'm just kidding. In the world of entertainment news, I have a couple of topics to discuss. You heard them at the beginning of this podcast. In the introduction, I'm playing with the introduction. I'm playing with maybe giving a preview of what it is we're going to talk about at the very beginning. You know, I think news shows kind of do that just a little bit. And I want to do that too, just a little bit. Velma. I have not seen it. So I've not seen the new Velma show. But I'm interested in hearing from any of you if you have seen Velma. Velma is HBO's new Scooby-Doo spin-off series. I don't have HBO. I don't have HBO or HBO Max or whatever their streaming service is called. Maybe that's just literally HBO Max. I don't really know anything about HBO. HBO? What the... combined HBO and BMO. I just never have had that. I didn't watch like any HBO growing up. I don't really watch TV now. I have Netflix. I have YouTube. I have Amazon Prime. I don't need to have all the streaming things. I don't have Hulu. I don't have HBO. I don't have all the things. I don't have Disney Plus. I've thought about getting Disney Plus. So I've only really heard about what's going on with Velma. So I'm going to talk about what I've heard and what I'm thinking about it. And if that sounds interesting to you, continue listening. My understanding of the Velma spin-off show is that, 1, there is no Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo's apparently not in it, which blows my mind still to this day. How do you have a Scooby-Doo spin-off with no Scooby-Doo? Right? Like, even a pup named Scooby-Doo had Scooby in it at least sometimes, right? Didn't it? I don't remember. I didn't watch a lot of Scooby-Doo. I watched whatever the Scooby-Doo series was called, the one that came out in like the friggin', I don't know, 70s and had reruns forever. I don't remember what that was actually called. I didn't really watch like Mystery Incorporated. I didn't watch, I think I probably seen all of a couple episodes of Pup Named Scooby-Doo. I didn't ever watch the one where they're like all kids or whatever. There's been so many different series of Scooby-Doo, so many different series, so many different spin-offs. It's a massive franchise. It's it's probably $1 billion franchise. I didn't actually look that up, but it's probably like $1 billion franchise. And of course, that means they have a lot of wiggle room to try different things, to try different ideas out. And the latest attempt here is this Velma show, and it has not been received very well. Having not actually seen the episodes myself, I can only speak to the biggest issues having been apparently the humor. The humor aspect missed its mark significantly. I'm looking at Google reviews right now, where it seems that after 2,466 ratings, it's sitting at a 1.3 out of 5, with the vast majority of reviews being 1s. I think it looks like it says 10% liked this TV show from Google users. That should tell you something. Usually, Scooby-Doo series are relatively well received. Not always fantastically, not always 5 out of 5s, not always 10 out of 10s, not like that, but usually not 1 out of 5. It does sit at a 53% on Rotten Tomatoes. What's going on here? Well, as it, like, I kind of want to read some of these reviews. In fact, audience reviews here. This is this one, 210 people found useful. I'm just stealing Google reviews here, just to give you an idea what's going on. There's just nothing progressive about this show, let alone make any breaking grounds or shattering glasses on anything other than to slap and insult the audience. Even to those that the progress stance of both Mindy and the show tries to appease to. That meant nothing to me. Additionally, this is supposedly being done before the Scooby-Doo gang even is a thing, which means that the characters here are very much underage, and And to top it off, the show brazenly shows off multiple underage high schoolers in naked and showering scenes, which tend to suggest uncomfortable tones. Okay, this is actually a little new to me. I'm reading this live. So apparently we have naked minors in the new Scooby-Doo series. That is deeply uncomfortable. What is with... I'm going to take a break for a moment to break off and say, what is with these new shows insisting that we have to have naked underage minors? Okay, I can think of one example off the top of my head, and I feel like I've railed against this before on the podcast. If I haven't, I hate this show, and if I haven't talked about it, I'm surprised. I hate Big Mouth. Like I said, I have Netflix, and on Netflix, Big Mouth in its first season exploded. It was really big, and Big Mouth is terrible. It's a bad show. And it hypersexualizes a bunch of middle school children, and you see naked middle school children, in at least season 2, if not season 1 as well. I think season 1 tries to play it a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? They try to dance around it a little bit, and then they really go in hard on it in 2. Again, the show is about development, about puberty and development, and I get that, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm seeing animated underage girls' bodies, and I don't remember now off the top of my head. I think underage boys' penises. I think that's all in there. It's just underage middle school animated porn, basically. I hate Big Mouth. I don't understand why it's on Netflix. I don't understand how it got made, other than Hollywood execs are pedophiles. Anyway, so apparently, here we go. I haven't seen Velma, so I can't speak for this, but apparently, naked showering scene for underage kids. And said naked scenes occur within the first episode. Oh, good. Yeah, okay, right from the beginning. Fantastic. From there, it just shoves almost everything in the kitchen sink and Ethernet? What does that even mean? At the audience, trying to set up everything too fast for anyone to get behind. This is... a review coming from It's the Kool-Aid Dude 2. I'm completely stealing your review for my show. I hope it's okay. What makes things worse is how characters here are connected to the entire Scooby-Doo series. Velma, who had in the series been a smart, quick-witted, and slightly unfortunate, what does that mean? Becomes self-absorbed, meta-joking, and incredibly rude. Fred, who was the nice guy and the sort of leader of the group, that had a tendency of splitting teams up and setting up traps, which a lot of adults took their minds to the gutters when making reasons why he split the gang up. Of course, that was all innuendo. Becomes a complete narcissistic racist. Daphne, who admittedly plays up the trope of damsel in distress, as well as the Beverly Hill girl, being someone who likes shopping, fashion, and keeping up physical appearances, becomes a simple brat with family issues, plus the hot and horny stereotype. Oh, even better, both Velma and Daphne keep their friendship, if you could really call it a friendship, and despite still being in high school, they're drug dealers. Have fun trying to make that seem socially acceptable. Oh, good. All right, great. So, underage, naked children and drug dealing. Fantastic. That's completely relatable to 2023, right? The fast-paced behavior of the show also defeats the point of getting people to settle into it. Its script is written akin to an awkward fan fiction that puts the shame into creative writing. The humor, being meta humor and what tries to be blue humor, falls flat at every attempt. Instead of having any fun, the attempt at humor tries too hard that it overshoots funny and instead lands in a mixed bag of lame, cringe, and confusion. There's body shaming, dismissals, and belittlements on emotionally honest characters, and specifically aimed and targeted traits that seem utterly unnecessary, rude, and simply offensive. To finish off, this show clearly had to be made intentionally as bait to get people raging against it. Ranging from taking a familiar franchise and series to radically changing the characters to then turn the characters into a verbal microphone in order for the writers to insult the audiences as much as possible in every conceivable manner. From there, it's used as a standing ground for the fanatical activists to a point and say, look at the savages behaving like animals. There simply had to be no other reason as to why the show continues, and every reason the show should not go on. Be smart and vote with your wallet. Don't watch, just pass the show. The attempts it tries to do with both humor and lessons, the progressionism that's gone too far and too sharp, and where it's just considered mindless zealotry, and just let this show fade into void and be forgotten. All right, I was struggling to read that a little bit. There were a few typos in this review, so if I stuttered, I apologize. Also, I'm just a stuttery person. But anyway, Kool-Aid Dude, well-written review. This is I think that's enough. I don't think I need to go into too much more. This is what I'm hearing all across the board, basically. In terms of it just being an offensive and rude and mean show. It doesn't seem to me like that this show, from what I understand and from what I'm hearing people say, it doesn't seem like the show was created with any intent to make anyone happy. From everywhere I go and everything I hear, you can't go too far into YouTube. If you type Velma into YouTube, you're going to find so many people talking about this show. Everyone's like under attack. This show hates everybody. It feels like the show was not written with the intention of making anyone laugh. That's what it feels like to me. What mysteries are to be solved? What is going on in this show that has anything to do with Scooby-Doo? It feels like as if perhaps the writers were trying to make a very different show with different characters under a different IP, but HBO said, no, it won't sell. Let's make it Scooby-Doo. We'll buy the license. That's what it seems to me. It seems glaringly obvious that these characters were not ever intended to be the Scooby-Doo gang characters, the Mystery Incorporated characters. That seems clear to me from just the outside. If that's not true, then I'm shocked that they would do this to the franchise so callously. Because it doesn't take a lot of effort to look at the hundreds and hundreds of episodes available in the history of the Scooby-Doo franchise to get inspiration for who these characters really ought to be. And no, I'm not saying you're not allowed to change up the characters for a spin-off series or for a reimagining. I'm just saying you're not allowed to do that as a writer for a show, but these characters do exist in the collective consciousness of the viewer, and to radically change them so offensively in a way that no one really wants to see. If I'm interested in Scooby-Doo, if I'm a big Scooby-Doo fan, and I want to watch the new Scooby-Doo spin-off series, I'm still expecting some level of similarity in my characters. That's what I'm coming here for. I didn't come here for a new IP. So anyway, it sounds like the show is garbage. No one likes it, and it definitely is not going to get a second season. Psych, it's already getting a second season. So HBO has already apparently confirmed that despite the backlash it's making, a season 2. Here's my take. I originally believed, and then I saw that, and this is coming from Screen Rant, is where I'm actually seeing it right now. So unless this is conjecture, my belief was that this show came out only because it was already in the works. HBO has pulled many, if not all, of its animated series off of its network as it is, off of its streaming services as is. I don't think HBO has any interest in doing animated series. But Velma already in the works. I figure they're going to release it. They don't care if it's garbage. We won't see another season come about. We won't see the light of the day. And yet here we are, a day ago, as of me recording this. Apparently, HBO has confirmed that they are, in fact, working on a season 2. Don't know why they would bother. They should probably let this burn and die instead of trying to save it or change it. I don't actually want to see it become any better. I would rather we all just collectively moved on from this experience. But let me know what you think. Have you watched Velma? Are we completely off base here? Is this a massive over-exaggeration in how bad it is? Let me know on Twitter at Weston Hasty with the hashtag Hasty Podcast, or comment anywhere that you can find me. I would love to hear your take. Let's take a quick coffee break, as I have gone and gotten my coffee. Let me take a sip out of it. Oh, what is this? I'm drinking out of my Hasty Podcast coffee mug, the official branded Hasty Podcast coffee mug we have available on magicmanmo.com. Yeah, that's where my store is. magicmanmo.com. Magicmanmo, of course, being me. And over there, you can get a few different kinds of Hasty Podcast drinkware. I've got a coffee mug and a tumbler and a water bottle. Check those out at magicmanmo.com, and you can sip coffee like I do out of a mug. All right, let's get back to the show. Next up on my list of topics today that I want to go over, I don't know how familiar you all are with D&D. I play D&D, have been for years now. I still consider myself new at D&D, and I'm not at this point, because I've been playing it for years, but I've not had a very widely varied experience in D&D. I've played a game. I'm currently in a campaign where I'm the dungeon master, running a campaign for a few others, and I've been in a campaign where I was a player with my brother as a DM. I was briefly in a campaign, unfortunately very brief. It was one of those campaigns that just kind of fell apart because schedules and stuff. But I was briefly in a campaign with another friend for a little bit, and that's about it, really. Like, I've only really touched a few different campaigns, and only a little bit as a player, and as a DM actually for a couple of years now, but I still feel new because I don't know, I haven't had a lot of different games, and the games that we've had I've only been able to play like a couple hours a week max, sometimes every other week. You know how schedules be sometimes, right? It can be tricky, it can be difficult to pull off. But I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for a long time, and a huge factor in influencing me to play D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, was my introduction to a little old troupe of voice actors playing Dungeons and Dragons on the internet for Geek and Sundry many years ago, called Critical Role. That was my introduction to the game, at least for 5th edition. Before my Critical Role introduction, I did have a friend that wanted us to try to play D&D many years ago, and we sat down with a 3.5 edition book and tried to roll characters, and we didn't know what we were doing. Literally none of us had ever played D&D. We really didn't know what D&D even was. Didn't even start the game. We didn't start playing it because, again, you kind of need to have a dungeon master with a campaign or a story or something in mind with which to play. A module, perhaps, we could have even read out of. We had none of that. We struggled to make characters and then didn't know what to do. It was bad. It was really bad. We were young, dumb, naive. Anyway, fast forward many years later. I don't remember what year it was. Critical Role started doing their thing on Geek and Sundry, and I heard about it somehow. I think I ran into it. I think I was watching Geek and Sundry other stuff from time to time, maybe on Twitch. And I eventually got back around to catching up on campaign 1 of Critical Role before they had quite finished it, but they were very far along at that point, probably getting close to finishing it. I caught up a ton of episodes, and I fell in love with their storytelling and the characters, and grew an interest in the game itself as well. And introducing it to my brother, we both really enjoyed the show. We both found an interest in playing D&D. And from there, we started trying to figure out our own campaigns to play with friends. That was my introduction to Dungeons & Dragons. Now, that whole setup, Critical Role's huge now. It's huge. If you haven't heard of them, we'll get into it just a little bit later. But that was my introduction, as is the case with, I think, a lot of people. I think a lot of people found popularity with Dungeons & Dragons through Critical Role and similar shows as well. But I feel like they really paved the way for many of us to find an interest in 5th edition, specifically Dungeons & Dragons, and made Dungeons & Dragons as popular as it is today. That was only made possible under the previous, technically current, but it's changing. The current open game license, that's the OGL. You may have been hearing about this news here lately. The OGL, the open game license, is changing. The open game license is a license that Dungeons & Dragons, under their parent company, Wizards of the Coast, who owns like Magic the Gathering, they have this license that allows people to use some content from Dungeons & Dragons for their own use, basically. There's a, I forget what it stands for, SRD. The Dungeons & Dragons SRD is like the standard reference document, I believe is what it is. The SRD is the basic core rules of how to play Dungeons & Dragons and core information that is readily available and free for anybody to utilize under the open game license. So you don't even have to, if you wanted to create your own Dungeons & Dragons type content, stories, modules, campaigns even, items, characters, anything like that, you have access to the SRD to do so under the OGL. Okay, acronyms. We got DND, OGL, SRD. We got a lot of acronyms in this, I know. But if you can keep up, then you'll be just fine. Wizards of the Coast, commonly denoted on the internet as WOTC. I'm not going to say WOTC, and I'm not going to say Watka. I'm just going to say Wizards or Wizards of the Coast. They own Dungeons & Dragons. Who owns Wizards of the Coast? Hasbro. Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast. Hasbro's not doing so good in the old stocks department. Their value has been tanking. They're making less money. They're struggling as a company, as literally everybody is. Literally every company is struggling, right? I mean, there's probably exceptions, but in my world, in the food industry that I work in, and just looking around, like, everyone's struggling in some level. We got issues everywhere, supply chain issues. People are spending their money differently than they used to. Everything's been shaken up ever since 2020. You don't need me to tell you. We've all been talking about it for 3 years now, that 2020 was the shift, the radical shift in changing everything about how we live, basically. Well, Hasbro, I guess, decided that they needed to do something about their assets. Not making enough money. And they looked at one of their assets, Wizards of the Coast, and saw that they owned Dungeons & Dragons and determined it to be an under-profitable venture, basically. That it was not making as much money as it could be. I heard, I can't verify this off the top of my head. I should do a better job. But I heard something like it makes somewhere in the realm of $100+ million a year. And apparently Hasbro's determined that Dungeons & Dragons content, just in the world, is generating like $1 billion in revenue. And that, how can that be? You might be thinking, how is Dungeons & Dragons only making $100 million, but there's like $1 billion of revenue floating around? Well, there's lots of people making other money off of Dungeons & Dragons that aren't literally coming from Dungeons & Dragons or Wizards of the Coast. Most notably, Critical Role, as I mentioned, they don't owe anything to Dungeons & Dragons. They don't work for Dungeons & Dragons, but they make Dungeons & Dragons related content. They have their long-running campaigns. They're on campaign 3 of their main series. They have spin-off series. So they produce this massive show, this whole lineup of many shows, in fact. It's all related to Dungeons & Dragons. They released an entire season of an animated show on Amazon, that Amazon bought. It was the most successfully kickstarted animated show of all time. Critical Role wanted to produce a single episode as a special and spend all this money making a special as sort of a thank you to the fans for their support over the years and with, the massive popularity that this show had garnered. That Kickstarter exploded, and they could afford to make an entire series instead. It exploded so largely, it garnered the attention of Amazon, who bought them, or at least bought their animated show, and now it's available on Amazon Prime. I've seen it. It's great. I have a few issues with it. I think I talked about it on a podcast. I have a few issues with it, but, they're not deal-breaking issues. It's a good show nonetheless. I recommend, what's the name of the show even called? The Legends of Vox Machina on Amazon Prime, I believe is what it's called. Yeah, I think so. I think that's the official title. Their season 2 is actually coming out this month, and I'm very excited to watch it. But things like that, as well as other content creators doing their own streams, their own shows, their own YouTube channels, people creating Dungeons & Dragons related merchandise, dice sets, etc. There's a whole thriving community of people making Dungeons & Dragons related content. It's not stolen directly, like they're not ripping off D&D. Under the Open Games license, they have access to a certain number of materials. They use that to create their shows, or, and this is the thing that I'm going to bring up too, it's fantasy-related content that happens to be Dungeons & Dragons inspired. Anyway, I don't know where the $1 billion number comes from exactly that apparently Hasbro thinks exists for them to snatch up. The new Open Games license that they are proposing, OGL 1.1, this is what everyone's upset about. Everyone's angry. Everyone's furious at Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro for this. The new Open Games license requires that if you make a certain amount of money off of Dungeons & Dragons content, you will now owe Wizards of the Coast a licensing fee. Anywhere up to 25% of what you make off of that content. There are some exemptions. Apparently, Patreon-based income is only going to be licensed, taxed, charged up to 20%. And then there are some other exceptions that I'm trying to think of off the top of my head exactly. There's a couple number figures. The 25%, the up to 25% starts when you make at least $750,000 in a fiscal year, I suppose. And I believe there was something else floating around about a figure if you make over 50,000. But there's a couple different tiers. The 1.1, OGL 1.1, has not actually been rolled out yet. It was being proposed, and the information was leaked to the public, basically, what Wizards of the Coast was looking to put out. So it wasn't official just yet. And already Wizards of the Coast is backing up on this and trying to roll back some of their claims, pretty much hoping that all of the community will take this as a massive victory and then forget about the OGL change so that Wizards of the Coast can sneak it in later. It's basically, it's leaked information that is the plan. So it's leaked information, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, but it's close. The Dungeons & Dragons community is very passionate. This is leaked information that has been quote-unquote confirmed in a number of different ways, but it's all confirmed in secret ways because people don't want to reveal identities, you know what I mean? So it's confirmed, but I can't confirm it for you, but it's been winky wink confirmed that people on the inside know what's going on. The Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro see all of the D&D community making all of this free advertising and content for them as the community basically stealing money that they should have instead. And so the new OGL is looking to restructure what you're allowed to use in regards to Dungeons & Dragons content, and then if you use that content, charge you for it. I have a few thoughts on this. One, it's nonsense. It's basically nonsense, with very few exceptions, which are the big players. With very few exceptions, does anyone make content around Dungeons & Dragons that relies on it being Dungeons and Dragons, if you know what I mean. So, look at your YouTube channels. If you follow any Dungeons and Dragons YouTube channels, your XP to level 3s, if your runesmiths, your what's the crit crab? I'm trying to just names that come to my mind. Any of the big Dungeons and Dragons related content on YouTube, they're not going to be affected by this. This is my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, and maybe they know better than I do, and that's fair. But the way I look at this, if you're making content that talks about D&D, Wizards of the Coast can't touch you. You can talk about whatever you want. Just like I can go on to my little podcast here and talk about, I don't know, Disney, right? I can talk about Goofy and Mickey, and I can talk about them, but I don't owe them any money for doing so. Same thing with Dungeons & Dragons. If I want to create a video discussing the top 10 best, I don't know, magical items in Dungeons & Dragons, I don't owe Dungeons & Dragons for that, for creating a guide to their game. I don't. That's free use. That's derivative work that they can't touch. They can say, well, we own the names to those items, and I'd say, yes, I referenced them in my guide. That's allowed. I'm already seeing a lot of content creators changing, or otherwise omitting the names of items and characters so that they can't get in trouble by Wizards of the Coast. You can reference Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but you can reference, this game exists. We don't have to pretend that it doesn't. And to go winky winky, we're talking about, I don't even know, boots of elven kind. I'm allowed to say boots of elven kind. I mean, there's so many items that are just generically named anyway that they're not going to be able to protect. Now, if I want to, say, create an entire video about a fan fiction, basically story in Elberon, which is a location in Dungeons & Dragons, if I wanted to create an entire story about Elberon, yeah, I would owe them licensing fees to use that location in my fan fiction or my creative writing or whatever. But if I'm creating a video just talking about Elberon that exists in a game, I'm clear. It's a thing that exists. I'm just talking about it, helping new players or explaining lore or whatever. I don't owe Wizards of the Coast anything, and they can take me to court on that if they want. We know they don't have the money for it because Hasbro's hurting for money. So anyway, there's a lot of hubbub here that I think for the vast majority of people, it doesn't actually affect. If you're just talking about Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast can't come after you. You have freedom to speak about that, and you have free use to use those words in your content. You just can't use those properties, those creative expressions, those ideas for your own works. So if you're, say, streaming a homebrew campaign that takes place in Waterdeep, that's a problem now in terms of the licensing. You don't own the property of Waterdeep to stream that content for viewers, basically, to create a commercial product using Dungeons & Dragons content in that way. This is an important distinction that I don't see a lot of people talking about. Now, this does affect people that do that stream directly D&D content for their own. Talking about Critical Role. They have had for a long time a really good standing with Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons to use Dungeons & Dragons material in their campaign settings. Their monsters, the different characters, their deities, their religion names, the different spell names, all this stuff that they use in their campaign, they take directly from Dungeons & Dragons, mostly without any alteration. And they've had a really good relationship for a long time with that. This is going to affect them. because they're going to be faced with either paying those licensing fees to continue to use that content in their homebrew work, or they're going to have to completely do something new, which is what they're basically saying they're going to do. This comes at a time where Critical Role is more popular than ever, basically. They're bigger, as a company, bigger than ever, and they have their own games division, right? They're making their own, like, tabletop games. So, like, they had a statement here recently. I don't have it quoted for you, but they finally made a statement that basically hinted at that, hey, if this goes through, we'll just make our own TTRPG. We don't need to use Dungeons and Dragons. We're big enough now. We have a studio. We have a game development. We'll just make a different TTRPG. It can be like Dungeons and Dragons, but it won't be Dungeons and Dragons. And that will completely avoid the licensing. And that's what we're seeing. Lots of people, this has been a massive move. Everyone's furious with Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons. Everyone loved them before. Like, the love for D&D was massive, like surging, bigger than ever before. And it is crashing and tanking hard. The latest way to show your hatred for this new OGL is the canceling of D&D Beyond subscriptions. D&D Beyond used to be a third-party application. It was a website that you could use its tools to keep track of your own character sheets for playing Dungeons & Dragons, look up information. It was kind of a third-party, help you outplay D&D application. It got really popular, got massively successful. It was actually a big sponsor of the Critical Role show. And then Wizards of the Coast, Dungeons & Dragons, acquired them, I think, last year. I think it was just last year, maybe 2 years ago. I have no sense of time anymore. But they acquired them. They bought them out. Now Dungeons & Dragons actually owns D&D Beyond. And it has a subscription-based system to use all of its tools. It's got a free version, for sure, but it's got a subscription service for premium benefits. The most recent thing that's going on now is everyone's encouraging everyone to just cancel your subscription. Cancel it hard. Hit D&D where it hurts. If you want to introduce this new license to make more money, and the license is insanely restrictive to the community, well, we'll give you the opposite. We'll hit you in the wallet. We'll make this the worst financial decision you've ever made. We'll cancel all these subscriptions. And so that's what's happening. In fact, so many subscriptions were canceled all at once that the site went down, and when it came back up, the cancel subscription button had been moved to a different location to make it harder to cancel your subscription, which is insanely scummy and frankly deplorable on D&D's part. But I'm sure they were being pressured by the higher ups to do anything they can to save their money. Anyway, this has become a massive greedy venture. I'm very sad to hear it. I like playing Dungeons & Dragons. Fortunately for me, I make no Dungeons & Dragons content to be even remotely concerned with licensing fees. Not that I think I would be targeted. I don't make nearly enough money, period, let alone D&D content to be concerned. And I mean, frankly, I don't know. Frankly, if it got to the point where they wanted money from me, I would just stop making it D&D related. It could be fantasy related. My troglodytes just become some sort of generic gnoll, which actually I think there are gnolls in D&D, but a gnoll is like that's a fantasy creature. Okay, a troll or something. You know, I can just make up a name, a blurb blab, or it doesn't have to be a troglodyte. I don't have to cast fireball. I can cast ball of fire. Ha! You can't touch me now. You know what I mean? Like it's so easy to not be D&D because it's just use fantasy. Dungeons & Dragons, I think, are really shooting themselves in the foot here when they can be actually so easily replaced. And that's not even talking about their competition. Pathfinder, we can move to Pathfinder. That's another fantasy one. That was actually originally a spin-off from D&D to begin with. There are other TTRPGs that aren't even that fantasy related. If you were a big fan of Cyberpunk 2077 when it came out, Cyberpunk is a TTRPG. You can play that. There's all kinds of stuff out there. If you want horror, there's the Call of Cthulhu. If you want, there's so much. There's so many TTRPGs. There's a Pokemon TTRPG. It doesn't have to be Dungeons & Dragons. They're not the only player on the block. They were just previously the biggest and most respected, and that is, I think, about to change. that's my take on the Dungeons & Dragons open game license news so far. I think it's actually not as big a deal as some people are making it out to be, but all the same, a really shockingly scummy move that seemed to come from out of nowhere, especially on the heels of the 1D&D launch, the basically new edition. They're launching that, and it was garnering already a lot of controversy, but also a lot of hype. And then to release this sort of horribly malicious, and also presented maliciously license situation, has just been a souring experience. But let's lighten the mood with our next topic. Before we get to our next topic, I would like to advertise my other podcast that I do with Alex Duquette, a friend of mine. He makes music on the internet at Alex Duquette on his YouTube channel, but that's not what I'm advertising. We have a podcast together called Profoundish. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. It's called Profoundish, all one word. We talk about a plethora of topics. Each of us alternate hosts every week. We talk about this, that, and the other, and then we have a game segment at the end. It's a lot of fun, probably even more fun than this podcast. So you should definitely give it a listen if you like this podcast or you don't like this podcast. You should go listen to Profoundish anyway. Check it out. Again, that's Profoundish, Profoundish, Profoundish on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Give us a listen. Thank you. For our final segment in today's episode of a Hasty Podcast, we are talking about Vinland Saga. Actually, in fact, I'm going to have to, because I'm so bad at names, I'm going to look up Vinland Saga characters because I'm going to want to reference people and I'm not going to remember their names because I am horrible at names. This can't be just a me thing. Do any of you out there watch a show, like binge watch a show, and then after you walk away from it, can't remember a single name of any of the characters? Is that just me? Like, while I'm not confused watching the show, if characters are talking about other characters, I know what's going on. I know exactly what's going on when they're talking about each other, to each other. I know who's who. And then I turn off the TV, I walk away, I go to bed, I wake up the next day, I don't remember the name of any of the characters at all. They're all gone. If I start the show again, if I start watching it, they all start flooding back to me. But when I walk away, it's gone. So I'm looking up a list of characters because I literally couldn't remember the name of the main character. Thorfinn. It's Thorfinn. I knew that. The only character that I knew I could remember was Leif Erikson, but that's because that's like, that's an actual person that, if you're an American and you don't know who Leif Erikson is, your history classes failed you. I'm not saying you should know a lot about Leif Erikson. I'm just saying you should know who that is. He's a Viking explorer that actually discovered America long before any of the other explorers from Europe did. Like Amerigo Vespucci, that America is named after, or Christopher Columbus, which we all know didn't discover America. Vespucci discovered America before Columbus. Columbus didn't discover Jack. Anyway, he discovered some islands off the coast of America. Anyway, usually when we think of American explorers, it's Christopher Columbus or Amerigo Vespucci. No, before any of them, Leif Erikson. He landed up in Northern America, like in what would be modern day, like Canada. I don't know what region exactly. Again, my history classes told me who he is, but I mean, we didn't do a deep dive into Leif Erikson, his life and Vikings and all of that. It's kind of like one of those, you might spend half a day talking about it in history class. But he's in the show. And that's because in Vinland Saga, Vinland is the given name of actually America or Canada, or the land to the west of basically Iceland and Greenland. Leif Erikson had journeyed out in that direction, survived the edge of the world, and discovered a new land. I'm actually really interested to learn more about Leif Erikson's story in Vinland Saga, but I haven't gotten more of it yet. So season 2, as of recording this, just dropped, and I haven't seen any of it, or I hadn't seen any of it until just a few nights ago. I started watching season 1, and in fact, what episode am I on? I was binge watching it. I sat down to watch just like an episode or two, and then continue watching Wednesday. I told you guys like 2 weeks ago that I was going to continue watching Wednesday and fill you in on that. There was a few shows that I wanted to watch and catch up on and tell you like my take on it and all that. But I meant to just watch like an episode. I'm on episode 13. I'm on episode 13 of season 1. There are 24 episodes in season 1, which actually I was shocked by, because a lot of Netflix's nonsense is like 10 and 12 episodes long. But I maybe maybe I'm actually, am I off base here? Is Vinland Saga a Netflix original or no? I might have just thought it was, and it's not. Okay, that explains that. It's not a Netflix original. Never mind. That explains that. That explains why it's actually relatively decent of a show, and not just 10 episodes long. Each episode's about 22 minutes long, so you're looking at, with 24 episodes, about 12 hours of your time to finish it. I went through 13 episodes, so I did spend... Well, I'm on episode 13, so I've gone through 12 episodes. I've spent about 6 hours of my life watching this show. Whoops. I binged it. I binged 12 episodes straight because I have no self-control. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, wow, if Weston's binging this show for 12 episodes, it must be a really good show. It's okay. There are things I like about it and things I don't like about it, and I'm going to get into it a little bit without spoiling too much here. But it's a show that I'm only halfway through the season, and I can't really decide how much of it is spoiler worthy, if that makes sense. I'm really interested in Leif Erikson's side of things because he's actually been to Vinland. But other than in the first like 2 episodes of the show, like, Vinland isn't really a thing. Like, no one talks about it. Like, Leif talks about it in episode 1 or 2. I forget which. He's telling like a story to a bunch of like Viking children, right? And they're in Iceland somewhere, and he's just telling a story about his travels to Vinland. And they're like, "Oh, you crazy old man! There's nothing over there. That's the edge of the world. There's a dragon. There's a serpent that will eat you if you travel that far west." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I know there is, but there's also Vinland." There's this place, and that gets brought up. And you would think that a show being called Vinland Saga would have a lot more to do with like traveling to Vinland, off to like explore, and the hazards and trials that come with that, and maybe this conflict. No, that doesn't happen. At all. We have our characters. What was Thorfinn's father's name? We got Thorfinn, who becomes the show's like main character. He's the son of, I want to just say Thor. I'm like scrolling down my list of Thors. There it is. I'm scrolling down my list of characters, and this is the worst list of characters I've ever seen in my life. He's like halfway down this list. What? He's like Thors is like the main character for the first few episodes. I forget what episode it kind of like switches over where it's not about Thor, it's about his son Thorfinn. But he's like one of the main characters, so like I don't know why he's so far down this list. He's down below some guy named Snake that I haven't even met yet, and I'm 12 episodes in. So so if that tells you, I don't know what's going on here. Well, also maybe these are characters from like the manga, if there's a manga, because if it's not Netflix, it's probably, because I think it was in Japanese first. I think I did see that in the dub. I was watching in English, but I accidentally hit the closed caption settings or something, and yeah, it's originally in Japanese. So anyway, I don't know if there's a manga associated with it. Probably. That's probably what's going on here. But anyway, things go down, and Thorfinn is separated from his family, basically kidnapped / stowaway. Like he's not really kidnapped. He stows away with this pirate gang led by a man of the name Askeladd. They pronounce it kind of different, so I'm not really pronouncing it right. But Askeladd, something like that. It's all Norse to me. But suffice it to say that Thorfinn wants Askeladd dead. But Thorfinn's like a child. When we first meet him as a child, he's like 6. A 6-year-old child. So obviously no chance fighting the this pirate leader. And mind you, this is one of those animated shows where it's kind of grounded in reality. It's kind of gritty. It's kind of dark. It's kind of grounded, but with elements of bombastic anime, like fights. Askeladd's got like crazy speed and cunning and maneuvering, and like he's like uncannily powerful. There's this character Thorkel who's like literally massive. He's like 12 feet freaking tall and like 5 feet wide. He's huge, and like throws logs as spears. Like he's stupid big. Like it's not possibly big enough. Or even Thor's himself. Thor's in the beginning is like almost a Goku-like figure, like in the sense that he's kind of unassuming to look at. Like he looks powerfully built, but otherwise like just a powerful dude, right? In fact, he's got like a little bit of like he's trying to learn to like blacksmith in like one scene early on. So you're like, powerfully built guy, whatever. No, he's like stupid fast. He's stupid powerful. Like, like just flings people with the flick of his wrist. Like he's like a Goku type figure. To relate that to another anime that pretty much everyone's familiar with, if you're even remotely familiar with anime. So you've got that sort of anime element where things are very bombastic and over the top, meshed with very gritty and dark. Like there's a scene where a slave has escaped from his master, and he's she should have died. He passed out trying to find help in the snow and was just buried in snow overnight when he gets found by Thor's family, actually. And he like brings him back to life, but he doesn't survive for very long. He survives for long enough to basically tell his story and then passes on. But it's a really grounded and sad story about like the world that all these characters live in. Like slavery is a thing, and people have hard lives, and with the sort of farming and maintenance required to just live in these very tough environments. And then as we move forward into the perils of war, the death, the betrayal, the inhumanity and violence and combat with what comes with war and mercenary work, as these different Vikings take on contracts basically for others to earn a living. It's very dark in that way. So I would call it like a dark anime, and it's very like sombering in many ways. But then it's coupled with anime goofy nonsense that is really jarring. Like I said, with these like powerful anime characters that are in fights. Actually, Thorkel that I mentioned, the big old guy, he's a massive offender where like he's involved with brutal warfare, and like everyone's having a rough time of it, and he's this big goofy guy that's just like, I want someone to fight me, please, I just want to fight. It's just so jarring. And I don't know if I like his character or not. I think his character is, the thing is, I think his character is supposed to be likable, but it's just so, it trivializes all of the violence that we've seen so far, and I think it takes something away from the show a little bit. Not that I want the entire show to just be depression after depression after depression, because on the flip side, Thorfinn, as he gets older, you watch him develop, years take place. I don't know what age he's at in episode 12 that I'm at now, but like teenage years or something. Like he seems like a teenager, kind of angsty teen kind of thing. He's got reasons to be angsty. When he stowed away with his pirate gang, he had to learn to survive because these pirates were not going to protect him. They basically had an agreement that they wouldn't kill him, like just outright, like they probably normally would have, if it had been anyone else. But they're not going to protect him either. So he gets to the point where he has to kind of fend for himself, and then he kind of joins them so that they can pay him and give him food and stuff. So he has to learn to be a pirate. He has to learn to murder. He has to learn to lie, cheat, steal, all these things. And it really weighs down on him. And his whole life is dedicated again to actually trying to fight and kill Askeladd with this very stupid sense of honor. Like he wants to actually fight and win in a duel to like beat him honorably. There's this scene where Thorfinn has a chance to kill Askeladd in his sleep, or Thorfinn thinks he does, but Askeladd's like secretly awake the entire time. He's just waiting to see what Thorfinn will do. because Askeladd is played off as this very clever, cunning, kind of gets to know his crew, gets to know his enemy. He gets into their heads a little bit. So that's how he's played up. So he's clever and tricksy like that, and he's powerful in his own right, but he uses his wits. Anyway, so he knew Thorfinn wouldn't actually do it. So that's why he lives so comfortably knowing that until Thorfinn can get powerful enough to beat him one-on-one, Askeladd knows that he's basically safe. And I think it's so stupid. Especially when you consider Askeladd, without getting into spoiler territory, was less than honorable with Thorfinn in the past. They play it off like Askeladd's honorable, but he's like literally not. And like his crew knows he's not. He knows he's not. There's a certain kind of honor amongst thieves thing going on, but Askeladd, like, if it will benefit him, yeah, he'll cheat. Yeah, he'll lie. Yeah, he'll dishonor. He's not above that. But again, I think that plays to he gets inside of people's heads, and they fall into the sense of like being able to trust him when you really shouldn't. I'm actually a big fan of Askeladd's character. He's a terrible person. I'm a fan of his character. He's a terrible person, though. And I don't like how... And I think you're not supposed to like this, so this is fine. I don't like how he's played as a father figure to Thorfinn. He plays himself as a father figure to Thorfinn. I can't tell if that's supposed to be, again, him manipulating Thorfinn so that Askeladd can get him to do things. Or if Askeladd really does, in this sort of delusional way, believe that he can be Thorfinn's father figure, since Askeladd himself doesn't have his own family. He's devoted his entire life to basically murder and greed. So he doesn't have his own family. So when Thorfinn is around and he kind of proves to actually be very capable, Askeladd kind of adopts him in a way and wants to like kind of share advice to him. But it's for Askeladd's own twisted means, right? He's very... I don't know, this show, for me, through 12 episodes, I'm more invested in what Askeladd is up to than, honestly, Thorfinn. Thorfinn's gotten boring to me. They've also made Thorfinn too powerful. I get that he had to come from being a tiny 6-year-old punk that doesn't know how to do anything to, like, becoming this mercenary that, like, murders people just by the dozens, just goes after generals of campaigns and just takes them out or whatever. He's become this assassin. By the way, I didn't really mention this. I wanted to. All of this is taking place at the point I'm at now, in like England and France. They went from Iceland and traveled east. Vinland is west. This is Vinland Saga, and they have gotten further away from Vinland. They have left the vicinity. So right now, I'm at a point where I don't know how this is going to loop back around. I don't know if anyone's going to ever make it to Vinland in the saga. I don't know why it's called Vinland Saga. Unless they just thought the name Vinland was a cool name for a show, and then they had to explain what Vinland was at the beginning just to justify the name. But they're Vikings and pirates, and it's an interesting show. I'm invested enough to at least at this point see through to the end of season 1. But unless the season takes a hard shift in a direction that I actually care about, I'm not going to be interested in season 2, I'm afraid. Because as of right now, Thorfinn, his character bores me. He's just, angsty teen, gloomy. He's got this very one-track revenge vendetta, and I'm not seeing a lot of development beyond that. They start to develop him a little bit. He's sick of war. He's sick of violence. He's at the point where he hates the violence, which is actually the one neat thing about that is that we saw him as a kid wanting to join wars, wanting to be powerful, wanting to like do quests and be a hero and all that stuff. As a 6-year-old kid, he wanted all of that. And Thor's, his father, had to sit down where, hey, violence isn't cool, basically. Strong warriors don't need weapons. And Thor's has this background we know from episode 1 where he used to be this mercenary and he's super powerful. He's killed so many people and he hates it now. He hates violence. And And so now we've seen that develop in Thorfinn after 12 episodes, where he's become like his father, where he's killed so many people and performed so many atrocious acts that he no longer wants to have any part of it, where he's becoming like his father, where he really wants to leave this life, but he's still on that one track. I have to kill Askeladd in a duel, specifically a duel. And it's starting to get boring. So unless something happens soon that changes the story, it's starting to wear on me. Askeladd's adventures, he's gone from a band of pirates that just like take up contracts to fight this group or fight that group or raid this village or raid that village. So now he's full-blown involved in a war. He's involved in wars between the Vikings, the English and the French and the French. All these different, kingdoms in England and these kingdoms in France, all these different things. There's all these warring conflicts going on, and he's heavily involved in them now. So this campaign is coming to a head in some way, where it seems to me that Askeladd wants to make one final big move to like set his legacy, because he's like, I'm getting old now, because it's been years. I think Thorfinn's like 16-ish, because I think 10 years passed from when he was 6, I think. So I think he's like 16-ish. And Askeladd, that probably puts him in his 40s to 50s. I don't know how old he was supposed to be, but he's getting older, especially for a Viking doing the kind of thing that he's doing. He's getting old now. So he's like looking at his legacy. So I think he's a wild card, and I'm really invested in what's going to happen to Askeladd. And I'm afraid it's going to end in him dying. I don't know that yet. I'm not there yet. I'm afraid it's going to end in him dying. And I'm afraid that once he's dead, I'm not going to care about the show anymore, because I'm not that invested in Thorfinn anymore, because he's gotten too boring. I was invested early, but it's starting to wear on me. So unless something changes significantly, there are other characters that I could talk about, but I'm quickly running out of time for this podcast. So I'm going to leave it there and wrap up with Vinland Saga. I'm 12 episodes into it. And it's an all right show. I would tentatively recommend it if you can give the first, say, 3 episodes a watch. You might have a much better vibe for whether you are going to like this show. It does start to drag in the middle, however. So I'll have to get back to you on how it ends to let you know if the drag is worth it in the end, if there's a payoff. The beginning's not too bad. It just kind of starts to slow down. So see if you watch first couple episodes, see if it's the vibe that you're looking for. It's that sort of dark anime thing going on. Then give it a chance. Otherwise, I will let you know where we're at maybe next week. That's going to do it for today's episode of a Hasty Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please do all of the things wherever you might be. If that's a like or rating or subscribe or whatever it might be, do those things. Share it with your friends. Connect with me on Twitter at Weston Hasty. I have an Instagram as well at Weston Hasty, if that is more your vibe. I'm not there very much, but I am there all the same. Check out my website, westonhasty.com, for all of the things that I do. That is sort of a landing page where you can find me. Support the show on Patreon with patreon.com/Weston Hasty. Have access to Weston Wednesdays, my other mini podcast for Patreon supporters, and buy stuff at magicmenmo.com. Thank you all so much for listening once again. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Bye.